Now, in an effort to get me off the stage, I'd like to introduce our legislative counsel, Melissa Biggs. Melissa Biggs, Esquire, began her career with DePino, Nunes, and Biggs in 2007. Ms. Biggs is a graduate of Southern Connecticut State University with a BS in liberal arts and earned her Juris Doctorate degree with Western New England School of Law. Attorney Biggs, in her role of managing partner, directs and lobbies our clients at the Connecticut State Capitol. Currently, Attorney Biggs serves as president of the Connecticut Lobby Association, where she has led positive changes in the General Assembly to foster a healthy workforce, a work environment for all the members of the Connecticut lobbying community. Melissa?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. First, I feel like it would be inappropriate for me to skip over what's happened in the last year and just give you some highlights of what happened in 2021 in regards to the legislative session. So if you give me a moment, I'd like us to go back and discuss briefly what got us here today. So it was March 2020, legislative session was in full swing. The start of COVID was talking about in the cafeteria, you'd hear rumors about what COVID was and where it was going. This is the craziest point of session where I'm checking the bulletin every day. And for those who aren't familiar with the Capitol, the bulletin is our Bible. Every lobbyist, anyone who works in that building reads it every day to see what's going on and what's important. And so for that day, they had said that there was going to be a special committee meeting to convene a state of emergency. And I was bored. I figured we wouldn't see those very often, so I'd jump in the room where you had all of the legislative leaders and the leaders of the Public Health Committee meeting together to declare a state of emergency. Now, COVID really hadn't touched the state yet. We didn't know much, so we didn't think much of it. But this declaration would allow the governor to have executive order authority. So at that point, they convened a special meeting. They said, hey, we're going to close the building for 2 days. We're going to clean it out, and everyone's going to come back on Monday. So, of course, I leave all of my stuff in my locker. We all leave. We're like, hey, this is a great 2-day break. Mind you, I haven't been back in the building since. So I miss all of my snacks. So the first executive order was issued March 12th, 2020. Fast forward to today, where the state has been mostly governed by executive orders, and we're over 50 executive orders deep since March. So these executive orders have dealt with everything from how municipal towns can meet, their hours, gathering sizes, the masks updates, remote notarization, and developing workplace standards. During this time, I was also the president of the Lobbyist Association, so I would be on calls with leaders every week saying, all right, are we going in yet? Are we going in yet? We've never seen a pause of legislative session. For those familiar, we have a statutory end to session. So missing days and weeks of session really is detrimental to the work that's being done. So we went week by week, and eventually it was clear that we were not coming back into session. So during this time, I worked with your leadership to talk about the things that were urgent now, like the workplace safety standards, like the vaccines, and like making sure that we were essential workers and defined as such, so there was no stopping in our everyday activities. So I will say we were successful. We were on the vaccine list when it was proposed. Then, of course, as soon as we did all that work, they threw away the list. So I apologize, but just know that you guys were priority first. The General Assembly did not convene to pass any changes to the state budget. In my 13 years in the building, we've always done a budget every year. That year, we relied on our 2-year budget, so there's no changes. They did decide to come in over the summer, and they held 2 sessions. So one thing that's been true is the House will only go in one day, and then the Senate will go in the next. So you will never see 2 of those bodies in the building at the same time to reduce the amount of traffic in that building. So in the House, they instituted new technology to allow legislators to vote from their offices. So if anyone is bored and throws on CTN, you're going to see a nearly empty chamber for most of the debate, as many of the legislators are encouraged to stay in their offices and stay pretty secluded to themselves. The Senate in March instituted the same type of technology. Previously, you had some legislators who were voting in their cars and would come in and bring in a message. It really reduced the amount of time. Since session started, we've had public hearings be held virtually, which for many of our members, I appreciate the time that you've put in to be willing to testify this session, and I think many of you have found it more convenient because you were able to do that within the comfort of your own office. I do think that going to this virtual model has really reduced some of the benefits of the back and forth during these public hearings, but we're encouraged to know that for next year they're looking to do a hybrid model. So for those who aren't able to make it to the General Assembly, they're trying to have in, a virtual or Zoom option. So now we've had several proposals that I want to briefly talk about. One is SB 927, which is the right to know statute. This was also talked about in a special session where it's trying to amend how a spill is being reported. In this bill, it expands who needs to receive the notification. It goes to the chief elected official as well as the public health director. And it also requires DEEP to develop a real-time public notification system. Since this bill was introduced, our association worked with the leaders of the Environment Committee to talk about the real-time problems that we're having when spills arise and how we can report these accurately, with also allowing us to address the matter at hand. We also talked to DEEP about how difficult sometimes the website is to use, and really making sure that this was a group effort to solve this solution, make sure that people had the information when they needed it. This bill has passed the Senate and is now waiting for action in the House. 968 is another bill that we've been testifying on and working on. It would limit the assignment of liens unless the outstanding principal exceeds $10,000. For some WPCAs, I have heard that this would allow a residential customer to not pay for up to 20 years without any penalty. So we are working with the proponents of this legislation as well as the committee leaders to express how this is actually going to be implemented and how it would disadvantage WPCAs across the state. We are still in negotiations on this bill. If you are concerned about how this would affect your community, please let me know, or please let your elected officials know so we can have a greater conversation. The intent of this bill came from a really great place, but I think making sure that it's done in a way that doesn't negatively impact the WPCAs in the process is important. So it's still a part of conversation. SB 941 is a bill that would impose new restrictions on entities that acquire the right to enforce real property liens, securing specified delinquent tax, sewer, and water charges. This bill is sitting in the Senate awaiting its next action. This bill has a lot of interest parties at stake, and there's a lot of debate to it. The last bill I spoke about was just for WPCAs, so we've been really driving the ship on how this negotiation starts. 941 have had a lot of stakeholders, and I expect a lot of changes before we see a final bill. It's also important to note we just saw the budget proposals come out of Finance and Appropriations. And some important things you should know about the finance proposal, which is the revenue side of things. They have included recreational cannabis and sports betting in their revenue estimate for the year. So that means that the spending side cannot be done unless those two issues pass the General Assembly, which is still subject of a lot of debate. But recreational cannabis is expected to bring in a lot of revenue to the state, so that would be a large hole that needs to be filled after the fact. I will say in the Finance Committee, they did propose $281 million for clean water funds in 2022, as well as $237 million for clean water funds in 2023. So that is a great estimate, and we don't anticipate any changes in that, even though we expect a lot of negotiations to follow through. I will say, since the finance package came out, the governor's office has said he will not sign that, so there's going to be significant negotiations over the next 4 years. So next 4 weeks. We have 4 weeks left of session. I can tell you that on Monday, the House went in session till 2 a.m., and then on Wednesday, the Senate was in session till 5 a.m. So the next 4 weeks will be jam-packed with long days, and there will be a lot of bill discussions. So I will be sending to your legislative committee any updates or amendments that need to be reviewed and have quick turnarounds. And I appreciate everyone's willingness to support me on that, and I know that it's not always easy to learn about or to have these legislative meetings and provide this backstory. So I appreciate everyone's flexibility. These are the most important issues, but we will be sending out a year-end report once session concludes, and I'm happy to take any questions. Off the hook. Sounds great. Oh.
With all of the infrastructure funding that's coming through on the infrastructure bill, can you give a little bit of a sense of how you think that distribution is going to happen?
Oh, sure. So the question was on the federal infrastructure funding, how I envision that happening, and that's a great question because that's been a bit of a fight between the General Assembly and the governor's office. Typically, the governor's office would have the authority to use this money in any way he deemed fit. I think a month or two ago, the General Assembly has decided that they want to have a greater say. So they asked the governor to put a plan in place and then let the Appropriations Committee have a say and have a vote on it. I will say the governor has allocated a lot of that infrastructure money to be specific to broadband because that is one of the avenues, but there has been more conversations about saying we should put this into water and wastewater and there should be a separate line item for that. So it's still a subject of conversation and I do not have a final timeline of when that will get approved or allocated. Thank you for that question. Is there any other questions? All right, well, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.
I know, Melissa, did you notice that when you said cannabis, like the room lit up? Seriously though, the legislative, you can see the expertise we have. Melissa's on the floor, well, it used to be on the floor in the, at the state capitol there, the legislative office building, and she's there every day and she knows what's going on. It's hugely valuable. Those three bills she talked about, there's been a tremendous amount of interaction with both our organization and the operators organization working as one. And been on Zoom calls with legislators. We're influencing the way these bills are. Now, you may not like the result of it, but you would really have not liked the result of it if we weren't involved at all. So if there's anyone here, and this, I mean, if you're an operator, you're a vendor, anyone that's interested in legislation of things you see that you think could be done better, then get involved and contact me or contact anyone on the board and we can get you on the committee so that you can be involved when these bills come up because they come up all the time. Some of them go away quite quickly, some of them not so much. But it's hugely important, so we really would like your involvement in it. Thanks, Melissa.